From the outside, they appear to be a very normal suburban family. Timothy and Tracy Ferriter, a mother and father, both working to provide the best lives for their 4 children, living in the affluent town of Jupiter, Florida, in a wonderful community. A nice large house with a 2-car garage. But only one car could fit inside because of what else was in that garage. An 8x8 wooden structure with a mattress, a camera, a desk, and a bucket. Investigators say this is where the Ferriters locked up their teenaged adopted son for hours at a time. Timothy Ferriter is now on trial for aggravated child abuse, but he says the structure in the garage was there to keep his family safe. His son suffers from reactive attachment disorder, and the Ferriters were afraid their son would act out violently and harm his siblings. Tonight, we take a look at this disorder as we investigate why this adopted boy was locked inside this structure in the garage by himself.
I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for joining us, and our coverage continues tonight of the story and the trial that everyone is talking about and everyone is trying to figure out. The bottom line here, they put him in the box. You want to call it something different, you can. But it's 8x8, it's square. It doesn't have windows. There's no closet. It's a box. They put him in there, and that's a fact. That is the reason that we're having this trial. I mean, without that, there is no trial. There are no allegations here of abuse. Even if some of the other conduct in this case seems abusive, without the box, there's no case. That's the bottom line. And they put him in there. Specifically, the man on trial, Timothy Ferriter, did it, as did his wife, Tracy. So whether you want to call it a room, a structure, a box, whatever, they're the ones who put him in there. That is just a fact in the case. So now we get to the next part of it. Why? Why? Well, Timothy Ferriter is saying because my son was dangerous. That they're at their wits' end, fearful that their adopted son would act out and would harm members of the family, specifically the siblings and the younger siblings in the family. That's the reasoning that we're hearing and what we've heard, is that it was a problem. He was violent, he was out of control, and we didn't know what he was going to do at night. He's grabbing knives, he's harmed others in our home. And there are many more things that happened than what the jury in this particular case is hearing about. But this is the reason. This is the reason why Timothy Ferriter says that he put his son inside that 8x8 structure, room, box in the garage. Now, why? Next question is, well, why was his son dangerous? Well, apparently there's a diagnosis of this reactive attachment disorder. And that's something they were dealing with and trying to figure out, I guess. Or were they? That's one of the questions in the trial. So you've got a young man, now he's a teenager, who apparently has behavioral issues, and people are tying it back to this RAD, R-A-D, reactive attachment disorder. So that's a big issue in the case, as is the room itself. So if he's got this condition, he's got this disorder, and you've spoken to doctors, like, what else did you actually try to do? And I think for the jury, this is a huge issue. And for the Ferriters, it's the question I think everyone has. Like, well, what did you really try to do before you landed on this solution? Because this wasn't the first box he was in. He was in a box in Arizona before they moved. So when they bought the new house, they bought a house with one less bedroom than they needed, and they built a, whatever you want to call it, in the garage, with a lock from the outside. So there's several questions that I want to deal with tonight in this program. The first is understanding what this reactive attachment disorder is, how dangerous it can be, what are the symptoms, like what does a child do who suffers from this, how do they get it, and how do you treat it? And then what effect does putting a child who has this into that box every day have on the condition? Does it make it better? Does it make it worse? And does the violence get worse because his reactive attachment disorder is getting worse because of the way he's being treated? So is it sort of snowballing and his behavior is getting worse and worse? That's what we're going to try to figure out tonight. Because a lot of those issues are the same things that the jury's going to be grappling with as they try to figure out if Timothy Ferriter, and then eventually his wife, when she goes to trial, committed a crime here. Or whether, as the defense said, it's just, parenting is tough. And they made some bad choices, they made some wrong choices, but they didn't have the criminal intent behind it all. So let's begin by listening to a clinical and forensic psychologist who testified today. Now, as you listen to this testimony, remember, this is a witness called by the defense, meaning this is a witness called by the defense to help Timothy Ferriter in the eyes of this jury. So let's listen to Dr. Sheila Rappa talking about what this disorder is, and then talk about, well, how did the Ferriters deal with and handle their child who was suffering from this, and is that good or bad for the child? Take a listen.
Normally what we see is there's a cycle of attachment from the moment that child is born. So what we see in the cycle is a child that is born, and let's say that child is wet or soiled or hungry or cold. That child starts crying. Immediately an adult comes, a caretaker comes, picks up that child, takes care of that child, soothes that child. The child's then able to self-regulate, go back to sleep, or whatever they're doing. This cycle occurs thousands of times with parents. If you've ever had a newborn, you know it's constant. And if you're constantly going after that newborn every time they cry, soothing that newborn, helping that newborn then learns, I have someone I can trust, I have someone I can attach to, and I know that if I get out of control or I need something, there's an adult that's going to come along, and that adult is going to help me. Children that do not get this, there's an interruption in that attachment. So you can imagine all the things. They don't trust that anyone will ever take care of them. They don't trust that their needs will be met. They can't see the world from anyone else's perspective. So attachment is a huge thing. What we normally see, so normally you'll get a child that has a reactive attachment disorder. They come out of a very bad environment. They go into a home that's loving and kind and has stability and structure. We normally see that the child begins to get better. So the attachment disorder gets better. There are children who have what we call persistent reactive attachment disorder, where the damage was so severe in childhood that as they get older, we don't necessarily see that damage start to go away. If they're plugged into the right therapies and they know the right places to go, and some of them, have to go to higher levels of care, then we might see some sort of healing, but it's something that they will struggle with, for some of these kids, for their life. There are certain behaviors that are kind of indicative of a kid that has reactive attachment disorder. And it would include lying, frequent lying for no good reason, just lies that make no sense. It can be aggression, it can be violence, it can be being mean to animals, being mean to younger children, stealing, hoarding. Food is a big issue for children with reactive attachment disorder. So they gorge on food or they steal food. They're constantly food preoccupied. Some of them don't eat. So it really just depends on, how that is manifesting in each individual child. But it's a significant psychological disorder when you see the symptoms involved of children whose reactive attachment disorder did not get better just because they were put in a loving home.
It is your opinion that the way that they chose to manage the behaviors is probably the worst way anyone could ever manage these type of behaviors, correct?
That's correct.
Now, although you can't make a diagnosis, you think that there are indications that the child in this case has complex PTSD as well as an attachment disorder, right?
Yes.
And if a child does have an attachment disorder or complex PTSD, the way the defendant acted towards the victim is the complete opposite of what anyone should have done with a child with one of those conditions, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
In fact, confining and isolating a child can exacerbate those disorders, correct?
That's right.
And so exacerbate means make those symptoms worse.
Yes.
Correct.
So,
The type of treatment, the way that he was kept and confined, correct?
oh, yes.
Would it also, and isn't it true that it's your opinion that it will also make the child feel rejected, correct?
Yes, it could.
It make the child feel like they're not good enough, correct?
Yes, it could.
It make the child feel like they are inherently bad, correct?
Yes, it could.
It can lead the child to maneuver or manipulate through a situation to avoid that isolation.
Yes, it could.
It can lead to depression, correct?
Yes,
It can lead to suicidal ideation, correct?
it could.
When a punishment is chronic, meaning that it happens on an ongoing basis, you will see a bigger impact too, correct?
For sure.
And as to the victim in this case specifically, you think that what was going on with him, the issues that he was having prior, was really exacerbated by how his parents acted towards them, correct?
Yes, that's my belief.
There is a psychological impact, a negative one, when punishment is humiliating and isolating, correct?
Yes.
Again, that's a witness who's called by the defense. Again, the defense will come back and say, well, yeah, we told you in the beginning of the case that they're bad parents, that he made a bad choice here. And it was the wrong choice, but it wasn't criminal. Let's dive a little deeper into all of this tonight. Joining us tonight in North Carolina, Reactive Attachment Disorder parent, advocate, and author, Kerry Williams is with us. There's a picture of her book, Reactive Attachment Disorder. In New York, practicing psychologist and attorney, Dr. Jean Cirillo. In Orlando, Florida, psychotherapist and CEO of Life Counseling Solutions, Dr. Janie Lacey. And in St. Louis, Missouri, licensed mental health and nationally certified clinician, Sharonda Brown. Welcome to you all. Dr. Jean Cirillo, I want to begin with you on this issue of this reactive attachment disorder. How dangerous can a child who has this become? How bad can it get? And the reason I'm asking you is I'm getting, I wouldn't say bombarded, but I've got a handful of people on social media reaching out and saying, listen, you guys don't know what it's like. We had a family member, I had a son, I had a daughter with this, and you guys just don't know what it's like. How bad and dangerous can someone who's suffering from this be inside of a family?
He can murder somebody, he can wind up in prison, but if he doesn't get the appropriate treatment, that's much more likely to happen. This reactive attachment disorder begins in the first 3 years of life. His needs were not met, and they're still not being met. He's in solitary confinement, worse than any prisoner. That's the worst punishment usually in a prison. You wouldn't treat a dog that way. They were depriving him of air conditioning. They weren't letting him use the toilet. What is the purpose except to make him feel like an animal? And then it's not so much his fault anymore if he behaves like an animal. He needs therapy. He needs help. And if he's part of the family needs family therapy as well as him getting individual help.
That's a great point, and that's another part of this entire equation. All right, Kerry Williams, your thoughts about, so this is a family who, again, it's claiming we're at our wits' end. You know, we're at our wits' end. This is really dangerous. We're concerned about the siblings, especially the young children. He's collecting knives. He's been violent. He hit somebody with a door who was pregnant. He has hurt someone else's shoulder. He's grabbed classmates by the throat. We believe this is a child out of control. This is how we controlled the situation.
Well, obviously they made the wrong choice. This is obviously a kid who has serious enough behavior that they need to be in residential treatment for this help. I think what we need to realize is that reactive attachment disorder is really too big for families to manage in the home. especially if their children are on the extreme end of the spectrum, like my son was. And those children do need to be in residential treatment where they can actually be cared for properly and they can be kept safe. And as far as siblings go, that's something I'm actually very passionate about. I think we don't talk about that enough. When we look at what care is best for a child who has reactive attachment disorder, we really need to not just look at what's best for them, but what's best for their siblings.
Dr. Janie Lacey, as you look at this situation, right, choices are being made. Now, this is a choice that they made prior to moving to Florida. Like they did this in Arizona, then they moved to Florida, bought a new house, and then built another. This is the second time they've done this. They did it to them in Arizona as well. What are your thoughts about where this child was in terms of if this is his day-to-day life and everything we're hearing, this is making him worse? I'm trying to get to like that chicken and the egg. Does your gut tell you that the level of danger that they're describing got worse because of the treatment, because of what they did when he was in Arizona before they even got to Florida?
So, Vinnie, we would want to consider all of that. Like, as I just heard my colleague mention, when I worked with children in my career that had reactive attachment disorder, it was because their families were getting help. And when we look at the family responsiveness, the parent training, we're looking at their individual therapy. When we help families, we help people like Carrie and other families strengthen the relationship and having positive interactions consistently over time. And we know when we do these types of things and creating that stable and nurturing environment, it helps the child create that safety and that love and all the things that they need. So when we look at how these parents, or what we know what these parents did by this isolation and all the things that this particular young man had to go through, of course it's going to cause more trauma. Of course it's going to exacerbate the situation. It did not help. It just made things worse. So we can look at reactive attachment disorder in and of itself, and depending on the person who is evaluating it, can almost put the blame on the child. But we have to look at the resources the parents had. When did they get the diagnosis for their child, and what did they do? Because we know that there is help, consistent help, and it's a long-term process. And them just taking it in their hands and doing it by themselves, we knew was not the right choice, and just made things a lot worse.
Well, speaking of choices, when they bought the house, they chose the house specifically that they did. Has a 2-car garage. You can only fit 1 car in it. They hired a man named Jacques, who I spoke to on this program, who is the one who actually built this structure in the garage. Let's take a listen to what he told us.
He said, listen, I live in Arizona. I have an office in my garage, and I just bought a house in Jupiter, Florida, that we are very close to move in, and I want to build the same exact office in the garage in the house in Jupiter, Florida. So I said, okay. He knew exactly what he wants. He said, build me a box. He has a two-car garage, which is 16 feet long, and he asked me to build a box basically on 8 feet on 8 feet, and he asked me on top of that to build a ceiling for that box under the existing ceiling with a space of 2 feet, so when they open the garage door, she can slide between the 2 ceilings. He asked me to add a deadlock to the door. And I said, okay, I don't know what, you have important things to keep in this office. So it wasn't look strange to me. So I went to the Home Depot and I bought the deadlock, and I installed it on top of the handle lock. And then I picture it for him, as you can see in the picture I send you. And then he asked me to reverse the locks. that means that the knobs of the locks will be outside of that office, and the key hole will be inside that office.
All right, Sharonda Brown. So a couple of things from this. Number one, now I know why I keep calling it a box, because the man who built it was told to build a box, and that's what he did. Number two, put the lock on the outside. But Sharonda, what's really telling to me is that the man who is building it is told it's an office. To me, that tells me that Timothy Ferriter knew this was not what I should be doing. I should not be building a box in my garage for my son. That's not right. And I'm going to tell the man who's building it, it's just a box for my office.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like he knew and he was intentional about the abuse that he wanted to inflict on this child. And a lot of times when people know that they're going to be abusive, they can be quite manipulative in their efforts. And this is how they protect their own shame and guilt. So in his mind, if he's saying, hey, I'm building an office, he doesn't have to deal with the fact that I am building an isolation space for my child who I should be getting help for, but I'm choosing not to. So he tells himself, oh, it's office. I think a lot of times parents who are, intentionally abusive, they have to, sleep at night. And so what better way than to tell themselves that they are, doing something good for the child. With children who have reactive attachment disorder, there is so much help. There's so much that people can do to improve this, including the family therapy. I would definitely question the diagnosis, though, because if they were saying that they researched this and they evaluate him at 8, and he only had 3 sessions per clinician, so that's 6 sessions total, which would make me wonder how much did they put into evaluating what was really going on with this kid, and if he's been evaluated since then. And if so, do they consider the amount of abuse that he's had to endure since being in care? It's almost like, a child can't walk. So you say, hey, I'm going to throw you in the ocean so you can learn how to swim and walk back to me. That creates more trauma. That creates almost a near-death experience for a child to have to go into a situation where they already don't trust anyone, and now they're encouraged to not trust even more. So I would just say that it's very possible. I'm not going to say it's possible. I will say it's likely that he knew that he was putting his child in a very dangerous situation. Then he couldn't even call it a bedroom. He wouldn't even say, I'm building a bedroom for my son. He says, I'm building an office.
It's a box. Okay, our guests are staying with us. A lot more to talk about in this case. And up next, we're going to talk about some of the alleged verbal abuse. What impact does that have on a child who is suffering from this disorder? Plus, coming up next hour.
In Palm Beach County, Florida, the boy in the box trial, Timothy Ferriter, accused of abusing his adopted son by locking him in an 8x8 structure in the garage. Tonight, we look at the evidence. Did the prosecution prove a crime?
I don't believe that they were malicious insofar as they were deliberately trying to abuse and hurt their child. I think that they were responding to behaviors that they were very concerned about, and they were trying, it's almost like they went into a let's contain and monitor and make sure that nothing's going to happen.
Florida father accused of locking his son in a box in the garage with a bed, a bucket, and a camera.
He was locked in a room for hours at a time.
Police say this abuse went unnoticed for years.
There are ring videos that the state provided of the child lying.
He faces up to 40 years.
I'm not sure they're going to be able to justify it. What's going on in this house?
The Boy in a Box trial. Live coverage weekday mornings at 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
Reacting to a child who has complex PTSD or an attachment disorder with things like anger and threats is not productive or helpful to a child with those conditions, correct?
Right.
And those reactions create a psychological harm to the child, correct?
Yes, and it can exacerbate problems that were already there, for sure.
Adding to the existing harm.
Yes.
Making it worse.
That's another part of this case, which is the treatment and the tone. And I think that's something that has caught a lot of people's attention who've been following this case. Now, we don't get to see the video. The jury does, because it has the minor, the adopted son, in the video, so that can't be broadcast on television. The jury gets to see it, but we get to hear it. So let's take a listen. This is Timothy and Tracy Ferriter and their adopted son, and it's all about chocolate.
Tell me something? What? Don't tell me what. This is your one chance. Don't look at me like you want to tell me something or not?
I have a nightmare.
Yeah, from where?
Blue van.
Where?
Green van.
Excuse me?
Green van.
Stealing again?
What the fuck wrong with you?
You're stealing
Disappointing.
chocolate and everything. You got so much stuff in your.
You're just such a disappointment. You're going to lose. I'm going to take you out of that school. And you're going to be in this room.
He's going to be.
You're this close. Because I can't trust you do. Put the ankle bracelet back on. And then you can try to run away if you want and do all the you do. But I'm going to lock your out.
You guys, those are for my toy.
Give me.
Why are you all sick?
I'm sick of the bull. You're a big boy, you're going to steal, you're going to talk to the police, I'm going to give you a deal, okay? You're going to steal from a house, you'll be done with school. You'll be in here homeschooling, and I told you that's a possibility. So go ahead and test me tomorrow by going to school and misbehaving or doing you shouldn't do. Test me.
Let's bring back in our guests. Kerry Williams, RAD, parent advocate. What do you think about this whole situation here? Now they've got their child, and apparently he's taken some chocolate, and this is the reaction. What are you seeing, or what are you hearing in all of this?
Well, I think that a lot of kids with RAD have food issues. They have issues a lot of times with hoarding. That's very common, what they're talking about. Obviously, they're overreacting to that situation. I mean, that's very clear. But I think that what's missing in the conversation here is that we need to look at how they got to this point. I would not jump to the conclusion that they're choosing to abuse their child or that they're choosing to not get help. I think it's very important to recognize that when parents talk to therapists, teachers, police officers, friends, and family about this situation, they are not believed. Because what they're explaining for the behaviors of their child are so extreme that the person they're explaining it to cannot even imagine that it is true. And moms in particular are blamed and shamed when they try to get help. So what I'd like to understand for this family is, what did they try to do and how did they get to this point?
Dr. Janie Lacey, your thoughts about what we just heard and the impact of that?
Well, with a teen that probably has already struggling with, I imagine emotional regulation, especially if the diagnosis is truly there. And then you're adding in their verbal abuse of what we're hearing. We heard the insult, heard the humiliation and him trying to intimidate him from that place of frustration. And absolutely, we understand that parents can be frustrated and they probably got to this place after consistent interactions. But we know that whatever their son was going through, that this type of approach can intensify his struggles. And it's going to reinforce his sense of being unsafe and almost being unworthy when you were kind of hearing some of the language and the verbiage that his dad was using towards him. So that's going to probably, if it hadn't, at that moment would have led to some type of withdrawal or more erratic behavior, which would then just kind of keep the system going of his interactions with his parents in particular.
Sharonda Brown, I want you to take a listen to a little bit more. This is Tim Ferriter. Again, another one of these recordings, and it's about the air conditioning.
Did you turn the air on in your room?
Yes.
Are you supposed to touch that?
Did you hear Baba?
Yes.
Did you hear his question?
No.
Are you supposed to touch air conditioning?
No.
Why did you touch it?
It was getting hot.
I don't give a if it's getting hot. You're a tough guy. You don't touch the air conditioning. I'll deal with you tomorrow on that.
All right, Sharonda, what are you hearing here?
I think that there's 3 responses to trauma. And let's keep in mind that RAD is a trauma and stress disorder in and of itself, right? So there's 3 responses. Kids will either fight through it, fawn through it, or they will flight through it. And so fight is when you kind of go to the motion of the conflict. Flight, obviously, you run from it. In fawn, you learn how to navigate, how to deal. It sounds like not only did this kid want to attach to these parents, but he almost began to identify with the father in a sense of, I'm going to be just as abusive as you are because I need you here, I need you in my face, and I want to manage, this type of control in the best way that I can. So when you hear the stealing or the cutting on the air when you know you're not supposed to, those are all responses to control. When people are stealing or when they're going to do manipulative things, it is a form of control. So it sounds like he was trying to identify with his abuser. And a lot of children would do that too. When they want to still be close to the parent who is abusing them, they will identify with them. And I think what I'm hearing is this child wanted some sort of attention. And like we talked about before, he would rather take negative over none. And it sounds like he was fine with, yep, I turned on the air, come down here, come get me, come talk to me. So he wanted to challenge his abuser just as much as his abuser kept challenging him. And that's what I hear with chocolate and the air.
Dr. Jean Cirillo, where is that line in these situations, which are tense, which are intense, between, purposeful abuse, almost to a level of being sadistic, versus frustration. That's the line I'm looking at here.
That it's tough love here. Somebody told them you have to be strict and you have to get the child to toe the line, and they're doing the right thing with the wrong child. I mean, something like air conditioning in Jupiter, Florida. Anybody should have air conditioning. At this point, it's abuse to make him turn it off. The chocolate might be for attention, or it might be that he's hoarding food, as my other colleague said, because he doesn't know when he's going to have anything. He has so little. But the point is that kids learn by example. And if his father is swearing at him and taking everything away, that's what the child is learning. He's not learning to listen to what his father's telling him to do, or mostly what his father's telling him not to do. He's learning to behave like his father.
Carrie Williams, where do you see that line between parental frustration and child abuse?
Well, certainly, I think that, using the F word with your child is abusive. I think that what happens is RAD does cause extreme frustration in parents, as everyone is saying. And I think that the issue is we have to get to these families before they're in crisis. Because once you get to this point this family's at, it's really way too late, right? We need to get to them years before this, when that family is still coping, when the family has the ability to therapeutically parent and the ability to do all of these things. But a lot of parents who have kids with RAD, particularly mothers, end up diagnosed with PTSD from it. They have depression, they have anxiety, because it is beyond their limits to handle kids like this. And so we need to get them the supports and the help they need, and we need to do that really early.